Good morning and welcome to Motivational Mornings, the podcast that gets you going before you get going.
Good morning and welcome to Motivational Mornings. My name is Vivi and as always I'm here with my co-host Ryan. Today we will be discussing the book Show Your Work by Austin Kleon. Now this book I think recommended from just a YouTube video on like top 3 best books that you could read over like a couple hours or a few hours. It's a quite short a book, maybe 100 pages or so, and so it's a quick read for you, for those of you guys who are interested in checking it out. And it's kind of really about 10 ways to share your creativity and get discovered is what the author proclaims. Now, the first point I found that was interesting, and mind you, this book isn't necessarily more concrete evidence-based like points on how to do specific things like some of the other ones. They're just more so motivational or creativity like keys to kind of unhack. So the book is full of general quotes and interesting points that you could always flip through and come back to. But the first point that I found that was interesting was when Austin talks about how to find your audience. And he says, from the comedian Steve Martin, he says, be so good that they can't ignore you. He says that you don't really find an audience for your work, they find you. And that the way that they find you is by being extraordinarily good at what you do. And that kind of hit a point for me personally, because I remember when I was finishing my undergraduate school and about to go to graduate school, I was asking a mentor of mine, I was like, hey, how do I become the best, chiropractor or in the future and etc. And he said, the only thing you really need to worry about is just be really, really good at what you do. That's it. And I said, well, what about like knowing business? Should I take any classes? What about extra things on seminars? Anything I should learn during school outside of just being a good clinician? He's like, no. Just be really, really good at what you do, and then everything else will kind of fall into its place. So that point really hit key for me because I've been trying to think about that, so on and so forth, ever since, but it's never really rang true until I kind of read it and reinforced it through this point in this book. Now, another point that I found interesting was when Austin talks about being an amateur. This was really, really unique to me and interesting because it kind of also hit another point that I've heard so many times. He says, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, whereas in the expert's mind, there are few. This is from, he said, Zenmon Srinyu Suzuki, and I probably, mispronounced that name, but this point relates to the fact that beginners think that everything is possible. They think that they can achieve whatever they want to achieve because they've never had the experience to show them they cannot do that. Whereas experts are full of things that they cannot do, shouldn't do, and therefore don't do. And so therefore, I feel like when we're in the midst of finding something and being in a rut, think more like a beginner. Think more like an amateur. Because sometimes in the process of doing things in an unprofessional way, the amateurs really, really make those true new discoveries and impact the world in a completely different way. Now, the next point I found was a little bit dark, I suppose, but it also brings light to the importance of how important every day is and how important it is to strive your best, to be the best in everything you do. He talks about Steve Jobs' relationship with death. Now, if you guys remember when Steve Jobs was on, the midst of having cancer multiple times and very, very frail towards the end of his work and his life, he was always consistently working and very, very adamant on just doing everything he can do. But he said that long before Steve was ever introduced to ailments such as cancer and etc., he always read obituaries. He says that most of us prefer to ignore the basic facts in life. But when you think about your inevitable death or end, it kind of has a way of putting everything into perspective. Steve, and I quote, said, remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life. And maybe you can take that to heart. Maybe when you're thinking about, should I do this kind of detailed process or that one or etc., maybe the most important thing you should think about is, hey, I don't have too much time on here, so let's kind of get to going and let's make some moves. If I screw up, hey, so be it. I'll fix it, and then it'll kind of get corrected in the future. The last thing, or I suppose second to last thing that I found that was quite interesting, was when he talks about sharing your trade secrets. Now, we're in a world now that's very different than, let's say, 50 years ago. 50 years ago, business environments and et cetera were not in the position to give out all their secrets on how they do stuff. You know, maybe like a person online, like let's say a physical therapist, didn't give all his exercises out because of the fear that when people did them at home, they wouldn't come see him. Maybe an accountant was, was fearful that if he had a YouTube channel and gave out all free advice, that people wouldn't go to him in result because they got the advice for free. But that's not really how it works, because when you give out your trade secrets, you invite people into the process of what you do. And when you invite people into the process of what you do, it's very quickly realized that what you do is complicated and there's steps to it. And you can give out the way you do things, but people will come to you when they need advice on what the area of expertise that you're talking about. He talks about Franklin Barbecue in Austin, Texas. Franklin Barbecue wasn't always a big pitmaster. He kind of just liked barbecue, Franklin, and just liked doing it. And so he always now talks about and does these barbecue shows where he'd invite his whole entire audience and tell them the exact recipe that's into the barbecue sauce, the exact way to make the barbecue with the fire roasting and etc. and all those intricacies. And everyone in the barbecue scene, when Franklin first started doing it, just thought he was insane, because he's like, that's what feeds our family. That's what feeds everyone's family within this industry. Why would you be giving out these secrets for free? And Franklin didn't really see it that way. He kind of just wanted to really, really, really be passionate about it, and he poured his heart into it, and he gave out those secrets because he wanted to become the best, and he wanted everyone else to uplift the barbecue industry. And all of a sudden, not too long after, Franklin Barbecue is by far the most successful, profitable barbecue joint in Texas. Which says a lot if any of you know about Texas barbecue. And to relay this fact, Franklin also says the impulse to keep to yourself what you have learned is not only shameful, but it is destructive. Anything, he says, that you do not give freely and abundantly to the world becomes lost because only you have the knowledge of how to do it. And my last point before you take over, Ryan, is the fact that Austin Kleon, when he says in the book, he says, honestly, sometimes if you want fans, you have to be a fan first. He says the only way to be accepted by a community is to be first a good citizen of that community. He says, shut up and listen before you talk. If you're only pointing at your own stuff, you're doing it wrong. If you want to get it and you want to get it right, you have to give. If you want to be noticed, you have to notice. And that just rings truth to a lot of things in society in terms of especially social media branding right now. People are always like, look at me, do this for me, look what I'm doing. And it's ridiculous, to be honest. But the key, and this is a kind of relays on to what Gary Vaynerchuk always talks about, he's like, focus on content. Content is king. Because content over time shows that you are not only being accepted by the community, whichever community that may be, but you are actually the leader of the community. Content is king. And the way you do that is by shutting up and listening and being very adamant on being accepted by a community and being a good citizen of that community first before asking anything in return.
Now, in this book, Austin talks about the importance of connections. And Vivi, I think this also ties into your very first point you made. So Austin says connections are important in life. And I totally agree with that. A lot of times it's not what you know, it's who you know. But Austin goes on to say that it's important to remember that who you know is largely dependent on who you are and what you do. And on top of that, the people you know, they can't do anything for you if you're not doing good work. So that drives back to Vivi's first point, where you have to make sure you're doing good work. You have to be the best you can be so that you can leverage those connections. If you're doing something, always do it at a high level. Not only will high quality work help drive connections to you, but also enable you to actually use those connections. Now, Austin also talks about how you can't count on success. You can only leave open the possibility for it and then be ready to jump on and take the ride when it comes to you. So one example the book gives is Austin and I believe a friend of his are trying to find a parking spot. So Austin and his friend, they're at the building's parking spot and they're circling and circling after a lunch break trying to find a spot, but the parking lot's full. They can't find a spot. Austin sits there going on for what seems like ages, and then finally a spot opens up. And as they pull into the spot, his friend said, "Gotta play till the 9th inning." Now, I know this seems like a silly example, but I think it does illustrate a good lesson. Don't give up, because you never know when your opportunities are coming, so you always have to be ready for them. That wraps up today's episode at Motivational Mornings. If you want to get a free Audible copy of this book or any other book, you can have a free trial at audibletrial.com/motivational mornings. So you can have a free 30-day free trial to see if you guys enjoy Audible. Thanks for listening and have a great day.